January 2026, the Middle East. The Pentagon has quietly switched on Operation Agile Spartan 26.1. The press files it as a joint exercise routine Navy-Air Force cooperation. Don't buy that for a second. You do not scramble a strategic fighter squadron, fly it 7,000 miles across an ocean, and park it on the planet's most volatile choke point just to rehearse handshakes. This isn't a drill, it's a rehearsal. And look hard at who the Air Force actually sent. Not the F-22 Raptor, not the B-21 Raider. It sent the 494th Fighter Squadron in F-15E Strike Eagles, a 1970s design with the radar signature of a barn door. Loud, dirty, supposedly obsolete in the stealth age. So here's the question. Why would the US Navy with USS Abraham Lincoln, the most powerful mobile airbase ever built, need a hand from a 50-year-old Air Force jet? The answer is yes, it does, just not for the reason you'd guess. This is a story about physics. Why bolt the F-35C, the finest invisible fighter ever flown, to an F-15E, a Cold War leftover? One is unseen, the other is a target. One's a scalpel, the other a sledgehammer. Critics call it regression. We call it the physics of volume. Stealth costs you something. To vanish, you hide your weapons. To hide them, you shrink them. But when the target is a command bunker under 30 feet of reinforced concrete, subtlety is worthless. Stealth doesn't crack concrete, mass cracks concrete. You don't need a ghost, you need a truck. To grasp why the F-15E is out here, first see why the carrier is coming up short. Not a mechanical failure, a geometric one. Look at the Persian Gulf. To a planner, it's a bathtub, a geographic trap. The Strait of Hormuz pinches to 21 miles at its narrowest. For a Nimitz-class carrier, sailing into that water is a nightmare. Carriers live on maneuver, on melting into open ocean. Inside the Gulf, USS Abraham Lincoln turns into a fixed target locked in a tiny cage. So through 2026, Lincoln stays out in the North Arabian Sea, beyond the reach of Iran's coastal batteries. But safety buys distance, and distance creates the first variable, space saturation. Scan the Iranian coastline, and you don't find a handful of batteries. You find thousands of short-range ballistic missiles, anti-ship cruise missiles, and hundreds of fast attack boats swarming the lanes. Threat density is total. Reaction time is nothing. Now check Lincoln's deck. The F/A-18 Super Hornets. What are they hauling? Not 2,000-pound bombs. You'll spot AIM-9X Sidewinders and AIM-120AM RAAMS. This is the overloaded shield. Because the carrier sits so far from the targets to stay alive, the Super Hornet fleet gets shoved into pure defense. They run combat air patrols around the clock. Their job? SWAT suicide drones and sink speedboat swarms. Every Hornet guarding the ship is a Hornet that can't hit the enemy. The offense has been chained into a defensive stance. The shield is raised, but the sword stays sheathed. And the F-35C? Lincoln carries the Black Knights of VMFA-314. So the F-35C is the fix, right? Wrong. The Lightning runs into the physics of stealth. The jet is a marvel. It slips through radar nets without painting a return, but only if it hauls every weapon inside its own body. Look at those internal bays. They're small, built for air-to-air missiles or a 2,000-pound GBU-31 JDM. A GBU-31 flattens buildings and bridges, but the enemy already knows that. It's why they spent 20 years digging. Nuclear programs, command posts, none of it sits on the surface. It's sunk deep underground, wrapped in layers of steel and high-density concrete. To kill it, you need a Penetrator, a purpose-built weapon. And here's the friction point. The weapons that crack those bunkers physically will not fit inside the F-35C. Bolt them to the wings and stealth is gone. Lose stealth and the S-300s kill you. There's the trap. We own the shield, the F-18, but it's swamped guarding the ship. We own the scalpel, the F-35, but it lacks the mass to cut through bone. We're facing a 10-meter concrete wall holding a pocket knife. We need a sledgehammer. Enter the answer. The 494th Fighter Squadron, the Panthers. The F-15E Strike Eagle isn't a fighter in the modern sense. It's a platform built for kinetic saturation. Look at the numbers. Maximum takeoff weight, 81,000 pounds. 40 tons of aluminum and titanium. Payload, 23,000 pounds. 11 to 12 tons of ordnance. Run the math. One F-15E hauls the explosive load of 3 F-35s combined. This isn't precision strike, it's industrial delivery. But we didn't bring them for ordinary bombs. We brought them for one weapon in particular, the GBU-72 Advanced 5K Penetrator. 5,000 pounds of specialized Eglin steel alloy, a kinetic needle. To punch a nail through reinforced concrete weight alone won't do it. You need sectional density. Most gravity bombs wear thin steel skins. Hit a hardened bunker at Mach 0.8 and they fail structurally. They pancake. The energy bleeds sideways. The GBU-72 is a different animal. Its casing is forged from high-performance alloy built to contain a blast, not just deliver one. It refuses to crumple. It dumps 100% of its kinetic energy into a single concentrated point. Inside rides a smart fuse rated to survive 10,000 Gs. It does not go off on contact. It senses the deceleration, holds, bores through 30 feet of earth and 10 of concrete, and waits until it reads the void inside. Only then does it fire. But to unlock that physics, you need terminal velocity. You have to drop it from the stratosphere. To release a GBU-72, you need an airframe strong enough to carry 5,000 pounds on the centerline without snapping the titanium spar. You need engines with the muscle to drag that weight to 30,000 feet, enough potential energy to reach penetration speed. The F-35 can't. The bay's too small. The F-18 can't. It lacks the legs and the thrust to weight. Only the F-15E has the raw mechanical capacity. But this isn't only about weight, it's about time on station. Look at the Strike Eagle's fuselage. Those ugly bulges along the sides are conformal fuel tanks, CFTs. They add drag, but they hold thousands of pounds of extra fuel without eating a single weapon station. That gives the F-15E the power to loiter. It lifts off a remote strip, flies to the Persian Gulf, and simply sits in the sky. It waits. It circles. It becomes a floating magazine of high explosive. When Lincoln calls a target, the F-15 doesn't have to launch. It's already there. But there's a catch. On a modern radar scope, the F-15E is a flying barn door. Iran's air defenses would kill it before it ever dropped a weapon, which brings us to networked lethality. War in 2026 isn't a dogfight, it's data management. The machine never fights alone. Watch the sequence. The F-35C launches off Lincoln and pushes into the red zone. The pilot keeps the radar cold, flying passive, a ghost. Using EOTS, its electro-optical targeting system, he eyeballs the desert, snips the electromagnetic spectrum, picks up S-300 radar pulses, and pinpoints the ventilation shafts of buried bunkers. He finds the target and doesn't fire. He sends a burst of data. Miles off, an EA-18G Growler catches the coordinates. This is the most important aircraft you've never heard of. The Growler lights up its ALQ-99 jamming pods. It doesn't fire bullets. It fires energy, high-power noise on precise radar frequencies, painting a strobe across enemy screens. It blinds the S-300 and scrambles its guidance loops. The Growler cuts an invisible corridor through hostile airspace, a tunnel of static, and through that tunnel, the Executioner arrives. Now the F-15E enters the fight. The Strike Eagle drops into the corridor the Growler carved. The pilot isn't hunting targets. The F-35 already handed him the grid. He isn't dodging missiles. The Growler blinded the shooters. The F-15E is simply the delivery system. It releases the GBU-72. 5,000 pounds of steel slams into the desert floor. It bores into the bunker, it detonates, target erased, and the engineering doesn't end in the air. War is about basing. For 20 years, the Air Force flew from vast super bases like Al Udeid, Qatar. We built palaces of concrete, but in 2026, those palaces are death traps. Iran's ballistic missiles have those coordinates hard-coded. They can erase a runway in the first 10 minutes, and a cratered runway turns your F-15 into an expensive paperweight. So the doctrine changed. We call it ACE, Agile Combat Employment, the doctrine of the nomad. It starts with dispersion. The 494th no longer lines jets up in neat rows. That's a target-rich buffet. Instead, they break the wolf pack into small, mobile packets. Some scatter to austere strips with no names. Others slip onto backup runways that barely show on civilian maps. They don't lean on fixed infrastructure. They lean on geographic anonymity. By scattering the force, you jam the enemy's targeting math. Instead of aiming at one coordinate, they have to chase a dozen moving variables. But scattering breeds a logistics nightmare. How do you fuel a squadron spread over 1,000 miles of desert? You cut the red tape. You run hot pit refueling. An F-15E lands after a strike, taxis to the end of the runway. The pilot never shuts down. The canopy stays shut. The radar stays live. The engines keep spinning at idle. A C-130 sets down beside it. Fuel hoses drag across the tarmac. Ground crews pump JP-8 while the exhaust is still hot enough to melt skin. Weapons crews hang fresh bombs in the swirling dust. 20 minutes. Standard. Hose off. The F-15 throttles up and launches at once. No downtime. No coffee break. To an untrained eye, Agile Spartan looks like a chaotic museum piece. A Navy stealth fighter flying wing on an Air Force Cold War relic. But look closer. This isn't a joint exercise. You're watching a single organism. This is the purest expression of American military thinking. We don't chase a Wunderwaffe, one magic superweapon. That's a fantasy for amateurs. We build systems. We took the F-18, the shield, the F-35, the eye, the F-15E, the hammer, and we fused them with a data link moving at the speed of light. We took a 50-year-old airframe, gave it the eyes of a 5th-generation Ghost, and backed it with the nuclear endurance of a carrier. We turned an obsolete truck into the deadliest sniper rifle on Earth. Agile Spartan proves we don't need a new plane to win. We just need to understand the geometry of violence. We don't fight fair. We fight with math, with logistics, with overwhelming industrial capacity. So the next time you see that dirty, loud F-15E thundering off a desert strip, don't call it a relic. Call it kinetic sovereignty.